All right, we are back.
We are live.
Right, Tuesday has come upon us again. How has your week been since we last chatted, Coach Val?
Man, let me tell you, it has just, I'm so glad we're talking about teacher burnout right now because it's crazy. Like we're in get ready for testing season. Everything is about high stakes testing that's coming up in the spring, into March and April. And so this is a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I can only imagine. I'm not in the same boat as you, but I do remember the stress of this time of year when I was working in the schools. So I send out all good vibes to you and all your teacher friends and all the teachers and educators out there watching. I know as a clinician in the schools, student testing season was challenging for us. We weren't pulling our kids for therapy during that time, but then we also had extra duties put on us too because you can't have any free time in the schools. There's no such thing. So I think that's a
No.
perfect segue into what we're going to talk about tonight. If you watched last week's episode, we talked about teacher burnout. We're doing a 3-part series, and last night, our last week, our discussion was super dynamic. We had some good comments in the chat, some good feedback after the show. So if you didn't catch the replay, I would highly recommend you go back and watch that after you finish joining us tonight. But we know that in the schools this time of year, teacher burnout is you're like that midway point. It's kind of like, whew, we made it halfway, but we still got another half to go. So in this profession, educators are leaving. Our school systems are struggling to keep teachers on board, struggling with teacher shortages. And so we have been exploring all the different components of teacher burnout. You want to update the people on what we talked about last week, Val?
So last week was all about what type of support are you getting? Because if there's one thing that helps with the burnout and the aftermath that can come from the burnout is the fact that you have some support to help you in the midst of everything. So there are different ways of getting or addressing administrative support. So, like, one way was professional development that's needed. If you got teachers who are having a hard time managing their classrooms for whatever reason, if they're just new to the profession or this year they just kind of got the class of all classes for whatever reason, they may not be as well equipped as they need to be in those situations. Just as an example. So when the school or the district offers general professional development that's the same for all the teachers, a lot of times that can make you feel like, well, do you really care about me? Are you really here to support me? So that
Yeah.
was one of the things. Um, yeah, I had a personal story last week, but
Definitely.
it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, yeah. So if you haven't caught last week's episode, I encourage you to go back and do so. We talked about that teacher support from administrators and also the support for discipline in the classroom as well with students. And so this week we wanted to talk about workload because the perception is that, you have some teachers have 45 minutes, an hour of planning time, and you get your summers off, you get your breaks, you get, the kids get out at 3, you go home at 3. And so we wanted to kind of analyze that because Coach Val is like, my day is scheduled down to the minute. So do you
Lit-
want to, yeah.
because like at this point, having been a teacher for 18 years, like it really irritates me when people talk about getting the summers off. Because people really still think like it used to be people thought you got 3 months off.
Mhm.
And maybe somewhere way back when in an antiquated time, I don't know, but I've never experienced that. Um, and then it got down to, well, y'all get 2 months off. Y'all get June and July. And that was almost true until they decided that we needed to go back in July.
Mhm.
So no, and so tonight's episode, we really want to just give people again perspective on an inside look on what's actually happening inside the building with the people. Tiffany mentioned that my schedule is jam packed to the minute. Like if you've ever looked at a a schedule at school, like you'll be able to see that from 9:52 to 9:58, like that's transition. And then so it's really timed and scheduled, so the kids don't have a whole lot of leeway. Well, what does that do for the teachers?
That's right.
It also causes us to be just as involved in that rigid schedule too.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
give you an example. Let's just take a little small snippet like my lunchtime.
Perfect.
Okay. And it's not the same for everybody. But again, this is me. So right now, when I go to work every day, my lunch time is from 12:15 to 12:45. So off the bat, that's 30 minutes for lunch.
Mhm.
However, I have to, as a middle school teacher, walk my kids to the lunchroom. And then I got to come back and, get mine. So that's going to take about 5 minutes. Seriously.
Mhm.
Um, well, I also have to pick them up from wherever they are and bring them back to the class. So we got 2 time segments where I'm responsible for going and getting them and bringing them where they got to go. Okay. 5
Yeah.
and 5, that's 10 minutes. So I got 20 minutes left of my lunch. Also, in that time, I'm supposed to use the restroom facilities because I've been stuck with kids all day, and I'm not supposed to leave them unsupervised, which I agree with. It's just but nature calls.
Yeah.
So let's just say that takes 5 minutes. I'm down to 15.
Mhm.
I hope I don't have to warm up my lunch too much because that could take another 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Honestly, depending on what I bring. Or if I go to the lunchroom, that means I'm staying in there longer. Like I want you guys to understand, like I'm down to like 10 minutes of actual eating time in that 30-minute lunch window. And I mean, everybody's lunch is not the same, but I've worked in high school and middle school, and we get about 30, 25, 30 minutes
Yeah.
for lunch.
And that's a really tight time schedule. And you mentioned hoping that you don't have to warm up your lunch, which can seem like small beans to some people, but when you have multiple teachers on the same lunch break and there's only one or maybe two microwaves and it takes maybe 4 minutes to warm up something that's frozen or a couple minutes for something that's just cold, it starts eating into that little bit of time that you actually have to put
Yep,
food into your
absolutely.
mouth. And I know for any of my speech therapists out there watching, I'm sure you can relate to what I'm going to share. I have been walking down the hallways of the building and I walk past the open classroom door and then a teacher sticks her head out like, Miss Williams, Miss Williams. I'm like, sure. Can you just watch my class real quick while I run to the bathroom? And so if it's one of those things you just kind of take for granted, right? You just go where you need to go. But when you have 25, 30 bodies that you're responsible for at a given time, you can't have that luxury. And so it just kind of dawned on me when that happened the first time, like, oh, wow, they can't even go when they need to go because the schedule is so jam packed and your responsibilities are such that it doesn't line up. So when we talk about workload being one of the causes to teacher burnout, it is a real thing. And even with those planning periods that teachers have, I know for myself, multiple buildings that I worked at, when there was an IEP meeting that came up, I was instructed to schedule that meeting during the teacher's planning period because then she doesn't need a sub for her class. And so now I'm eating up your time. Sometimes those meetings were quick, sometimes they weren't. So now your planning time is gone. So what could seem like a good chunk of time where there's little to do because you don't have your kids with you, the job still continues even when the kids aren't right there with you. So how does that look for you in middle school with your planning periods?
So the current schedule that I have one 50-minute planning period.
Mm-hmm.
But don't forget about those transition times. That also happens during the planning period. And but I do know there are schedules where sometimes middle school teachers have too, because it's tied to the kids, like connections, exploratories, whatever they call it at their school. But when I was in high school, we were on block, which means the kids go through 4 classes each day, and they were 90-minute classes. So their planning was 90 minutes. But again, it's always taken one at least once, sometimes twice a week of something else. It's like planning, that's not the correct label for it because it's viewed as teacher free time.
Yeah.
Oh, when do the teachers have free time? Oh, where their planning is at this time. You're equating the two, and they're not.
Yeah.
If I'm teaching kids all day, but I'm responsible for creating a great lesson for them to learn what it is they're supposed to learn. When am I supposed to have the time to do that? It's supposed to be planning.
Yeah, yeah. And I know it gets eaten up by different things. I know in some schools they have those professional learning communities where, you're looking at data from testing and it can just consume that whole period of time that you were supposed to use for planning purposes. And so then what happens is you end up doing what you were supposed to be doing or wanted to be doing during your planning time outside of school hours, outside of your work hours. And so that also adds to that feeling of burnout once we get to this point in the school system. And for anybody listening that's not an educator, I don't want this to come across as this complaining, venting session, but it is about giving perspective because you don't know what you don't know. You just you have to hear these experiences for you to be able to understand some of the things that are in play on a day-to-day basis that teachers deal with day in and day out that just kind of stack on
Right.
themselves all school year.
Yeah, because in our earlier episodes, we talked about like the communication piece between parents and the school teachers especially. And so when you think about a teacher contacting you or getting back with you on something, and you're expecting a phone call, if you have perspective on what a teacher's day actually looks like, then hopefully you'll start to understand why that can be kind of difficult at
Mm-hmm.
times. And so just, teachers are doing the best they can. Teachers, parents are doing the best they can. That's why it's so important to understand the other's perspective and give grace, do your part, do what you can. In that, with them.
Definitely. Yeah. We have to have that perspective taking. We have to be able to open up our minds to say, let me see it through their eyes. And then that gives
Mhm.
you a new look on the situation and hopefully can help you shift your responses or your reactions to certain things when you don't hear back right away. So that's why we bring these topics up.
Right.
Not a complaining session, not for any sympathy, it's for perspective. So I know for myself, a couple weeks ago, well, right before the winter break, I emailed my son's teacher to ask for a conference once we got back from winter break. I realized right before winter break, nobody wants to really go into a deep dive about concerns unless it's something major. So I just said, get back with me after the break. Have a great holiday and Happy New Year. So we got back from the break and I didn't hear anything. So, first couple of days back, still getting everybody back in their right minds, especially with the little ones. They kind of seem to forget what the expectations were on a day-to-day basis. So I gave her a couple of days, still nothing. So I reached out, email, hey, just to follow up on what I emailed about before the break, can we get a meeting scheduled? And I heard back from her, and her response was, hey, thanks for understanding and giving some time to get everything back into the groove after the break. And she was grateful for that. I had that perspective because I worked in the schools, but if you don't have that experience working in the schools, then this is such a great eye-opening discussion so that you can understand when you don't get those responses in what you feel like is a timely manner. Now, if it had been 2 weeks and I hadn't heard back from her, well, then now I'm just going to have a phone call. You just keep going up the ladder, maybe go into the school, whatever it is, but give some grace as well. And I know as we talk about the tight schedules for teachers, there's also this class size, right? We talk about how many kids are in a class and what that looks like as far as the workload for teachers as well. So you do have that schedule, the time constraints, but there's also workload too, depending on that class size, the behavior needs in the class, the academic needs in your class. It varies. What has been your experience with class size as it impacts your workload?
So, of course, what would be school without some grading, some assessment, right? Because we opened up with state testing. That's the season we're in. So on the classroom level, I want people to imagine like you gave your kid this test and you gave them, let's just say you gave them 10 questions. And some of them multiple choice, but some of them they have to like write an answer, or if they're too young to write, you have to listen to what their answer is going to be. Okay. And let's just say it takes about 3 minutes for the non-multiple choice ones, and about a minute on the multiple choice. Okay. So one kid, 10-question test, and you're looking at like almost 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. We have around 30 kids on average in our classrooms. So to grade an assessment like that for 30 kids takes a long time. It can. Okay, let's just say we only do multiple choice. That's fine. So if it only takes me a couple of minutes, 2 minutes per kid to grade a multiple choice, you're looking still at 50 minutes, an hour. And remember, I said my planning was 50 minutes. So I'm not even getting through one class. And by the way, middle school, you have multiple classes. We go to 6 periods. Remember the high school, they had the block were 4. So they have 3 sets of classes to do. Again, giving perspective, because we got into the profession knowing we were going to have to grade papers. Promise you, we knew that. However, it's about understanding that this is a part of the tasks that are required for the job that take time, that a lot of times it's not accounted for in the list of what people see us doing. I think a lot of people think about teachers and they only think about standing up in front of the classroom teaching the kids or doing some kind of cool activity with the kids, and that's it. Like, no, there's that's the 20-30%.
Yeah. And how do you feel about, I can just imagine, so this is just my assumption, if I had 30 kids in a class and I gave a test that was mostly short answer, So now I have to read all of these answers versus giving a test that's all multiple choice. And I can just quickly go down and check X. That is less time consuming for me. That brings my workload down, right? So do you feel like sometimes teachers may alter the way that they give assignments or assessments to just kind of mitigate that imbalance between the time that they have in the day and the workload that they have as well?
Absolutely. And actually, in the state of Georgia, the state test that we're talking about used to be for the math that they would have short answer, they called them constructed response questions on the test that someone would have to grade. Well, COVID came along and they cut all those out, and we're past that, initial COVID era, school is regular, and they have not brought them back. It took a long time for those things to get assessed and for the scores to get back to us. It's the same thing in the classroom. Yes, teachers I definitely make that decision on how I'm going to assess the students based on the amount of time I have available, to grade the assessment.
Yeah.
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 I mean, and there's almost this sense that teachers are supposed to do schoolwork outside of school hours. Which it's hard for me to understand, because most other jobs that you have, once you leave that job, there's really not anything required of it. A lot of salaried workers would, like, lawyers, doctors, they do research and stuff outside of their work hours. And teachers are technically salaried, contracted workers. But it's funny how we're made to clock in and sometimes in some places clock out. Like we are directed to be there at between certain hours. I find that interesting. What do you think?
Yeah. At one school that I was at, they had a clipboard in the office on the counter, and you had to come in the morning, write your name, and put what time you got there. And then at the end of the day, come and write what time you left. I found that so frustrating, annoying, and degrading, because we're all professionals. So you have to be there, right? Because nobody's going to see your kids for therapy if you're a clinician like me. Nobody else is going to teach your class if you're not there. And as many times as I've stayed after for meetings, or I've stayed after to discuss a situation with another teacher, or worked on stuff at home, the idea that you want me to sign in and sign out is mind-boggling. It's insulting, to be honest. It's insulting. And it does go back to trust, because there are some people in any profession, you're going to have those that maybe take advantage. But literally in the schools, everyone will know if you're not there. So this seems so, and there you have people that get there early and stay late, and maybe that's their badge of honor. I was never one of those people. I get there when I get there, and I leave when it's time to go, and I'll do the work either at home or maybe the next day. But that's something that definitely is frustrating. And if any of our teachers are out there watching right now, or you're watching the replay, if you're required to sign in, sign out, clock in, clock out, just put a comment in the chat. Let us know how that makes you feel, because again, it goes back to that support from administration, like we talked about last week. I feel like you are doubting my integrity to show up and do the job and be here when I'm supposed to be here, if I'm a salaried employee and I have to clock in and clock out, or sign in and sign out as well. So yeah, that was one thing that really bugged me. To put it like
I think you brought up a good point in that about just the integrity of it all. But also we put those teachers on a pedestal as if they are some type of martyr or something like that. And we all know that overworking, the stress from that is bad for your health. And
Mm-hmm.
so to idolize something that can also be to the person's detriment, I feel like is wrong.
I, I
So
wholeheartedly
and we use those characteristics of people to give them accolades like teacher of the year and
agree.
those kinds of things. And that doesn't mean that just because they're staying, they're doing more or being greater than the person who's not, you know?
Yeah, yeah. We had a great question in the chat. Were you ever told to log the hours you worked on school stuff at home? The answer is definitely no.
Not ever. Not ever.
Definitely not. I think it's just like you mentioned. It's like the expectation. If it doesn't get done here at school, then you get it done at home. So
Yeah.
that unpaid time off, that or that
Mhm.
unpaid working time is another level or component to this teacher burnout as well. So you started pre-planning back before the start of the school year, which took away your summer. Then you rolled into the start of the school year, which any educator, clinician will tell you is super crazy at the first
Mhm.
part of the school year.
Mhm.
You finally get your schedule, everything is kind of in sync. Winter break comes. Now you come back from winter break. You might have to remind some of your students what the
Yep.
expectations are, and then you roll into that testing season. So there is just this constant need for there to be work done that's outside of your work hours, which is unpaid for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, like you mentioned, the mental, physical toll on someone over a school year, it can be really great. And we haven't even talked about the behavior problems that could be in your classroom as well, with the various academic levels in your class. So you're differentiating the learning, you're trying to be the disciplinarian, maybe following behavior intervention plans if your kids have those in your class. So you're juggling all of these balls in the air constantly. That's a lot on the system. It's taxing.
It's very taxing. It's the difference between exerting physical force to do something versus exerting like mental energy, like you were talking about. And it's not just one type of mental exertion. You said behavior issues is its own separate bucket. Teaching the lesson and then having to split that and teach it four different ways depending on the kid that you're talking to in the moment. um, Intertwining those two things, if you're up in front of the class and you're trying to explain something the best way possible, but then Johnny and Susie over here are in cuffing season and they decide to be, together right now, and they trying to holler at each other during the class period. Like, no, we're talking about X's and Y's up here. Those
Yeah,
like so your brain goes in all different directions, and it takes a lot of energy.
yeah. And I think that as we were preparing for the show and just kind of thinking about all the different components that could lead up to teacher burnout, I think you mentioned something super important. And as we talk about solutions, we last time we even shared, like, this is such a big issue that there isn't this quick fix. There's not this one solution that just magically makes everything go away. But just as we're giving perspective to those that aren't in the educational field, teachers are secretaries, they are first responders, they're learning facilitators, their judge and jury, their mediator, their counselor. So many hats are worn on every single day, working within this very constrained and restricted time schedule for the day. So much so that a bathroom break outside of a planned break is something of a phenomenon. And that goes on throughout the school year. So just taking all of that into account and just kind of thinking on that for a bit, it I hope that it opens up some new perspective for people who might say, well, you knew what teacher was when you went to college to get your degree. Like, so, stop complaining. It's not so much as complaining, but it is an attempt to have you walk a mile in their shoes. And I think that is so important. We talked about this last week, feeling seen and feeling heard. You can't see me or hear me if you never know what I'm going through. I have to have that space to share that so that you can see me, so that you can hear me. And that opens up perspective.
And especially like to the teachers, Tiffany, one thing that we can definitely do is set boundaries. We can communicate and be vocal about how we're doing during the day. When you walk by a colleague or an administrator and they say, "Hey, how you doing?" Like, don't just say great. If you're not great, like, let's go ahead and be honest about how we're feeling in the moment, what's giving us the stress, what are the stressors that are causing us not to be our best while we're at work. Because most teachers got into the profession because it was something that they were passionate about and that they love to do because they want to help kids. And so we don't want to let all the other stuff take away from that. We want to limit that as much as possible. So let's speak up.
Definitely. And I know that I might have some of my fellow speech therapists watching as well. And all of these components to teacher burnout is educator burnout. If you work in the education field, all of these things could pertain to you. And I know for myself as a clinician, all of these things pertain to me as well. So we use the word teacher and we say teacher, but we're talking about anybody who's had a foot in the educational setting. So I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was just this feeling that teachers don't have a chance during the school year and at their school to be human. They're held to this standard of operating like machines, like robots. You come in, you follow this rigid schedule, you get things done, whatever it takes, and you do that day in and day out and day in and day out, and maybe recuperate for your 3 days at Thanksgiving or your 2 weeks at Christmas or your 1 week at spring break, forgetting that teachers are human too. They have their own lives as well. And so you just take all of that and compress it together. That's a lot to handle. So I think it's super important what you said about being vocal, speaking up, setting those boundaries, sharing with parents. My son's teacher, if I ask her how she's doing at pickup, she gives me a very honest answer. Today, these kids were absolutely out of control. Or she says, you know what? Today was a great day. Everybody did really well. Or she might even say, and she has, it's been a tough week for me personally. And so then that just gives that human element to it so that you understand the dimensions to a teacher, just like we do anybody else. Just like everybody understood during the pandemic when everybody was doing virtual learning. And it was, oh, these teachers, they do so much. I can't even imagine. I get to have a peek into their world. And then pandemic ended and it seems like everybody forgot.
That's it. That's it. So I would love for the parents who are listening, and I am parents, I'm talking about me too. Just have conversations with your kids about the expectations for how they're supposed to behave at school. And I don't just mean like whether they're behaving good or bad. Like, what does it mean to be the best student you could be while you're at school? Talk to your kids about how they learn so that they know to do those things while they're away from you. I think it's just super important that we set our kids up for success within a school learning environment. Not just to help the teachers, but that definitely helps the teacher and the classroom environment, so that that learning can take place.
Yeah. And I know next week we are coming up with our third part to this 3-part series, and we're going to touch on that last topic that you just brought up a little bit deeper, what parents can do to help out. And it is not teaching your kid reading, math, and arithmetic at home. The job can go beyond that. So we're going to touch on that next week as well. I think this was a really great discussion. I know we are here every week on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Again, we're going to finish up this very dynamic conversation next week, and we really hope that you join us because we're going to have special guests with us as well. Our first guest here on the show. I'll let it be a surprise. I won't spoil it. So yeah, come back and finish out this series with us next week, 9 p.m. right here on Facebook Live, and also streaming over on LinkedIn as well. So thanks, Val. This was a great conversation. I hope it opened some eyes.
It's always a good time. Always a good time.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And if you watched this for the replay, thank you. Share this with any parents or teachers that you know and have them comment. We'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.